Welcome. On this channel, I share short yet meaningful stories. Thank you for being here.
The crystal shattered before I felt the pain. 500 faces froze. My husband's hand still hung in the air. I reached into my clutch. Not for ice. Not for tears. For the phone. 3 words. A code from childhood. Come get me. I pressed send. Exactly 15 minutes later, the ballroom doors opened. My father walked in. He looked at my bruise. Then he reached into his pocket and handed my husband a contract. That was the moment I understood. The man who raised me had built the same cage I'd just escaped. I walked out with nothing. And for the first time, I could breathe. 500 guests. Maybe more. I stopped counting after the first 100 faces turned toward us, their expressions caught in that grotesque suspension between polite curiosity and naked horror. The string quartet in the mezzanine had faltered into silence, the last note of their Brahms hanging in the air like a question nobody dared to answer. Gavin stood 3 feet away from me, his hand still raised, his tuxedo sleeve perfectly tailored, his cufflinks platinum, I remembered, a gift from his mother, catching the light from the chandeliers in brief, merciless flashes. His chest heaved, not from exertion, but from the adrenaline of finally having done it, of letting the mask slip so completely that there was no putting it back on, no matter how many apologies might follow in the dark privacy of our Park Avenue apartment. I did not touch my face. I did not cry. I simply stood there, breathing in the smell of spilled champagne and the gardenias that had cost $11,000 to arrange along the balustrade, and I thought, with a clarity that felt almost holy, so this is what it costs. Not the slap. The slap was cheap. It was the 5 years before it that had been expensive. My fingers found the edge of my clutch, a slim black thing that had belonged to my mother, its satin worn soft at the corners from decades of her own grip. Inside, beneath a lipstick I no longer cared about, and a credit card that bore my married name, was my phone. I unlocked it without looking, my thumb finding the pattern by memory, and opened the thread that had sat dormant for 3 years, 4 months, and 11 days. 3 words. I typed them slowly, deliberately, watching the letters form on the screen with a detachment that frightened me. Come get me. The message sent. A single check mark. Then 2. I slipped the phone back into the clutch. Closed it. The click of the clasp was the loudest sound in the room. Gavin lowered his hand. His eyes, the same storm gray I had once described to my best friend as the color of a lake just before it rains, were wide and wet and utterly unfamiliar. "Claire," he said. His voice cracked. "Claire, But I was already looking past him, toward the far wall of the ballroom where the antique clock hung above the double doors, its hands creeping toward midnight. I had 15 minutes. I had always had 15 minutes, ever since I was 6 years old and got lost in the crowd at the state fair, my small hand slipping from my father's grip while the Ferris wheel turned its indifferent circles against a bruised August sky. I had cried for 9 minutes before a security guard found me. My father had fired him the next day, not out of anger, but out of principle. Never again, he had whispered against my hair that night, rocking me in the leather chair of his study that smelled of pipe tobacco and old paper. If you ever need me, truly need me, send me the words. I will come. No questions, no delay. 15 minutes. I had believed him. For 34 years I had believed him. The ballroom was suffocating. The heat of 500 bodies, the weight of their stares, the low murmur of shock beginning to ripple outward like a stone dropped into still water. I could see them in my peripheral vision, the board members from Gavin's firm, their wives in borrowed diamonds, The journalists from the Times and the Post who had come to cover the merger celebration. The photographers whose cameras had gone silent. I wondered how many of them had already begun composing the narrative in their heads. Drunk husband, embarrassed wife, nothing to see here. I stood very still. My cheek throbbed in time with my pulse, a dull, insistent drumbeat that seemed to echo in the hollow space behind my ribs. I thought of the first time Gavin had hit me. Not with his hand. Never with his hand. Not then. But with words. Sharp and surgical. The night I told him I was thinking of leaving my job at the nonprofit to go back to school. Who would hire you, Claire? You've been playing at being a good person for so long, I'm not sure you remember how to be a real one. He had said it softly, almost tenderly, over a bottle of wine I had selected myself from the cellar. I had laughed. I had actually laughed, because the alternative was to understand that the man I loved had just drawn blood without moving a muscle. That was 2 years ago. The erosion had been so gradual I hadn't noticed the landscape changing until I was standing on a cliff edge, looking down at a sea I didn't recognize. Gavin took a step toward me. His hand reached out, trembling, and I flinched. Not dramatically, just a small recoil, the way you pull back from a hot stove, and the crowd saw it. I heard someone gasp, a sharp intake of breath from the direction of the bar. His face crumpled. "Please," he whispered. "Claire, please. Let me explain. It was the stress. The deal. You know what this week has been like." I looked at him. Really looked. The fine lines around his eyes that had once seemed like evidence of a life well lived now looked like fault lines. The mouth that had once kissed the inside of my wrist with such reverence after our first night together was twisted into something ugly and desperate. I felt nothing. Not hate. Not love. Just a vast, empty expanse where feeling should have been, a tundra stretching between us that no words could cross. "I know exactly what this week has been like," I said. My voice sounded strange in my own ears, too calm, too level, as though it were coming from somewhere above my head. "You closed the Meridian deal. You were named managing partner. You bought yourself a watch that costs more than my father's first house." I paused. The room was so quiet I could hear the ice melting in someone's abandoned glass. "And you hit me because I asked you to stop flirting with Jessica Vance in front of your mother." His face went pale. "That's not—" "It is," I said. "It is exactly." I turned away from him. The movement made my head spin, a brief, nauseating tilt of the floor beneath my heels, and I reached out to steady myself against the edge of a table. A waiter, young, maybe 22, with kind eyes and a name tag that read Eduardo, materialized at my elbow. "Ma'am," he said softly, "can I get you some water? Ice, maybe?" I looked at him. At his hands, rough and clean, holding a linen napkin. I thought of all the hands that had held me in my life. My father's, broad and impossibly warm, carrying me up the stairs to bed when I fell asleep in his study. My mother's, slender and always smelling of lemon and something medicinal, braiding my hair before the illness took her. Gavin's, in the beginning, tentative and reverent, as though I were made of something precious and fragile. "Thank you," I said to Eduardo, and I took the napkin. I pressed it against my cheek, not because I needed the cold, but because it gave me something to do with my hands, something to anchor me in the physical world while the social one crumbled around us. Gavin's mother, Vivian, pushed through the crowd with the efficiency of a woman who had spent her life ensuring that scenes happened only when she scripted them. She was 71, silver-haired, dressed in emerald silk that made her look like a judge presiding over a courtroom she had built herself. She reached Gavin first, her hands fluttering to his shoulders, his face, his hair, as though checking him for damage. "Gavin," she said, her voice carrying that particular brand of Upper East Side concern that was really just performance. Gavin, darling, are you all right? Not is she all right. Not what have you done? Are you all right? I watched him lean into her touch, watched his shoulders drop, watched him become a boy again, and I felt something shift in my chest, a tectonic plate grinding into its final position. I had spent 5 years trying to be enough for a family that had never wanted me, trying to fold myself into the shape of a daughter-in-law who knew her place, who understood that love in this world was a transaction measured in invitations and introductions, and the correct order of precedence at dinner parties. I had worn the right dresses. I had laughed at the right jokes. I had pretended not to notice when Vivian introduced me as Gavin's little wife, the social worker, with that inflection that turned an honorable profession into a quaint hobby. And all the while, I had kept my own name buried, my own blood, my own inheritance. I was Claire Ashford on paper. I had been Claire Ashford since the day I married Gavin in a small ceremony in the Hamptons. 40 guests, no press, exactly as my father had requested. What Gavin didn't know, what no one in this room knew, what I had guarded with the ferocity of a woman who had seen what money did to love, was that I had been born Claire Ashford Hale. And my father was not a retired accountant from Connecticut, as I had told Gavin's family during our engagement dinner. My father was Julian Hale, the Julian Hale, founder and majority shareholder of Hale Media Group, the private conglomerate that owned 3 national newspapers, 12 digital platforms, 2 cable networks, and a portfolio of conservative talk radio stations that reached 40 million Americans every single day. I had changed my name legally after college, dropping the Hale, keeping the Ashford from my mother's side, because I had watched my father use his name like a scalpel, cutting away the parts of people he didn't need until they fit into his narrative. I had wanted to be chosen for who I was, not for what my last name could unlock. And Gavin, in the beginning, had chosen me. Or so I thought. The clock on the wall ticked. 12 minutes. Vivian turned to me, her expression arranging itself into something resembling pity. "Claire, dear," she said, her voice dripping with that particular syrup that concealed poison. "Perhaps you should go to the ladies' room. Freshen up. This is a difficult moment for everyone, and I'm sure you don't want to make it worse." Make it worse. As though I were the one who had thrown the glass. As though I were the one who had raised a hand in a room full of witnesses. I opened my mouth to speak, but a voice cut through the silence before I could form the words. "Mrs. Ashford." It was not a question. It was a statement, delivered from the direction of the main doors by a man in a charcoal suit that fit him the way armor fits a knight. Marcus. Marcus Chen, my father's head of security for the past 18 years. He was 60, compact, with the stillness of a man who had seen things he would never speak of and had made peace with that silence. He stood just inside the threshold, his eyes scanning the room with the detached efficiency of a general assessing a battlefield. The crowd parted for him without knowing why. They simply felt the gravity of his presence and stepped aside, the way you step aside for a storm front. Gavin looked up. His face, still blotchy from emotion, registered confusion. "Marcus," he said, "what are you doing here?" Marcus did not look at Gavin. He looked at me. "Miss Hale," he said. His voice was gentle, infinitely gentle, and it was the gentleness that broke something open inside me, because it had been so long since anyone had spoken to me with that particular softness, as though I were not a problem to be managed, but a person to be protected. "Your father is waiting." The room inhaled as one. Gavin's head snapped toward me. "Hale?" he repeated. "What does he mean, Hale?" I didn't answer. I was already walking toward Marcus, my heels clicking against the marble with a rhythm that sounded like a countdown. The napkin fell from my fingers, a small white flag abandoned on the battlefield. I did not look back at Gavin. I did not look at Vivian. I walked through the crowd of people who had ignored me for years, who had smiled at me with their teeth while dismissing me with their eyes, and I felt their gazes change as I passed. Felt the shift from poor Claire to who is she to, oh my God, is she? We reached the doors. Marcus opened one, his hand steady on the brass handle. The cool air of the hotel corridor hit my face like a baptism, carrying the smell of lemon polish and old carpet and freedom. I stepped through. And then I saw him. My father stood at the end of the hallway, near the service elevators, his back to me. He was wearing the same navy overcoat he had worn for 20 years, the one with the frayed cuffs that my mother had always threatened to throw away. His silver hair was neatly combed, his posture straight, his hands clasped behind his back in that posture I knew from 1,000 childhood memories. The general before the battle, the judge before the verdict, the father before the reckoning. I had expected to run to him. I had expected to collapse into his arms the way I had at 6, at 12, at 20 when my mother died and the world became a place without color. Instead, I stopped, 10 feet away, and I waited. He turned. His face was the same as it had always been, handsome in a severe way, the kind of face that looked carved from granite by an artist who had run out of patience for softness. But his eyes were different. Not warm, not angry, calculating. Claire, he said. He did not open his arms. He did not step forward. He simply looked at me, his gaze traveling from my face to my cheek, cataloging the damage with the same detachment he might use to assess a quarterly report. You're hurt. Yes, I said. The word felt small in my mouth. He nodded, once, as though confirming a data point. Then he reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a phone. Not his personal phone, the burn phone. The one he used for conversations that could never be recorded, never be subpoenaed, never see the light of a newsroom. He dialed a number. He waited. Winston, he said into the receiver, his voice carrying that particular timbre of command that had made grown men stutter in boardrooms for 4 decades. Yes, I'm here. No, she doesn't need a doctor. She needs a solution. He paused, listening. I don't care what time it is in London. Get me the contract, the full one. Non-disclosure, non-disparagement, career protection clause, the entire package. I want it ready in 30 minutes. He ended the call. He looked at me, and for the first time since I was a child, I saw something in his face that I could not name. It was not love. It was not even concern. It was assessment. The way a chess player assesses a board after an unexpected move by an opponent. Claire, he said, we need to talk. I felt Marcus shift behind me, a subtle repositioning of weight that closed off the hallway, that ensured no one could approach without his knowledge. The service elevator dinged. The doors opened. My father stepped inside and held the door with his hand. Come, he said. It was not a request. I followed him into the elevator. The doors closed. The scent of his cologne, sandalwood and something darker, something that smelled like old libraries and power, filled the small space. We descended in silence. I watched the numbers light up. 3, 2, lobby. My reflection in the brass doors looked like a stranger. A woman with a swelling cheek and a 1,000-yard stare, wearing a dress that cost more than most people made in a month, holding a clutch that contained the ghost of a message. Come get me. He had come, but he had not come for me. The elevator opened into the hotel's underground garage. A black sedan waited, engine running, exhaust curling in the cold fluorescent light. My father walked toward it with the brisk stride of a man who had never learned to wait for anyone. Marcus opened the rear door. My father got in. I stood on the concrete, looking at the open door, at the leather seat that gleamed like a promise, and I felt something cold settle in my stomach. "Claire," my father said from inside, "get in the car." I got in. The door closed. Marcus took the front passenger seat. The driver, someone I didn't recognize, young, military bearing, pulled out of the spot with the smooth efficiency of a man who had done this 1,000 times. "Where are we going?" I asked. My voice sounded thin in the enclosed space. My father was looking at his phone, scrolling through what appeared to be a document. "To fix this," he said. He did not look up. "Gavin made a mistake, a public one. But mistakes can be managed, Claire. That's what we do. We manage." I stared at him. The city passed outside the tinted windows, a blur of lights and rain-slicked streets. The Manhattan I had loved since I was a girl coming to visit my father in his office on the 47th floor. The city that had always felt like a living thing, breathing and watching and waiting. "Manage," I repeated. The word tasted like ash. "Yes." He finally looked at me. His eyes were the color of winter mornings, pale and pitiless. "Gavin struck you. That is unfortunate. It is also a liability. There are photographers in that ballroom. There are journalists. There are people with phones who are already uploading footage to platforms I control, Claire. Do you understand what I'm telling you?" I understood. I understood perfectly. My father didn't own just newspapers and cable networks. He owned the algorithms that decided what people saw. He owned the silence. "You're going to make it disappear," I said. "I'm going to make it profitable," he corrected. He turned back to his phone. "Gavin is talented. He closed the Meridian deal because he is ruthless and intelligent, and exactly the kind of man who thrives in a market that rewards aggression. His firm is valuable to Hale Media. His connections in the regulatory sector are even more valuable. I am not going to destroy a useful asset because he lost his temper at a party." The car hit a pothole. I felt the jolt in my spine, a physical shock that seemed to travel up into my skull and lodge behind my eyes. "He hit me," I said. The words came out flat, factual, as though I were reporting the weather. "And he will pay for that," my father said. "In the way that matters. He will sign a contract that ensures he never speaks of this night, never speaks of you, never speaks of our family in any context that is not pre-approved. In exchange, he will be promoted to CEO of the Meridian subsidiary within 18 months. He will have access to capital. He will have a platform. He will be, in every way that the world can see, a success." I felt my hands begin to shake. I pressed them together in my lap, the nails digging into the backs of my fingers, but I could not stop the tremor. "And me?" I asked. My father looked at me. For a moment, something flickered in his expression. Something that might have been regret, or might have been irritation at the inconvenience of my question. "You will be taken care of, Claire. You will have the apartment in the West Village, the house in Sag Harbor, the foundation money. You will want for nothing." "And the truth?" I whispered. "The truth," he said, his voice dropping into that register he used for editorials and ultimatums, "is that the truth is a commodity. It is bought and sold like everything else. And tonight, the truth is not in your best interest. Do you want to be the woman who was slapped at a party? Do you want that to be your biography? Your mother's legacy? No. You want to be Claire Hale, the woman who endured with grace, the woman who understood that power is not about moments, but about decades." I turned my head. I looked out the window at the city that had raised me, The city that had taught me that money could buy silence, that influence could erase violence, that the right last name was a shield against the consequences that broke other people. And I thought of my mother. Eleanor Ashford Hale had died when I was 24, not from the cancer that had eaten her ovaries, but from the loneliness that had eaten her soul. She had been beautiful and brilliant, and had given up a career in architecture to be Julian Hale's wife, to attend his parties, to raise his daughter, to smile for photographers while he conducted his affairs with the discretion of a man who knew that the press would never print a word. She had taken pills at the end, but it might as well have been suffocation. She had simply run out of air in the gilded cage he had built around her, and one morning she had stopped breathing, and the world had mourned a great woman while I had mourned a ghost who had died years before her body followed. I had sworn I would not be her. I had changed my name. I had married a man who knew nothing of my father, who had looked at me across a crowded bar in Brooklyn and seen only a woman with tired eyes and a laugh that sounded like relief. I had built a life of small authenticities: my job at the women's shelter, my secondhand furniture, my refusal to let Gavin buy me a car I couldn't afford myself. I had believed that if I made myself small enough, humble enough, real enough, I could escape the gravitational pull of my father's empire. But gravity doesn't care about your intentions. It simply pulls. "Pull over," I said. The driver didn't move. He looked at my father in the rearview mirror. "Claire," my father said. His voice had taken on that warning tone, the one that had preceded every argument of my adolescence, every punishment, every reminder that his love was conditional on my compliance. "Pull over," I said again, louder, "or I will open the door while we're on the bridge." My father sighed. It was a small sound, almost inaudible, but it carried the weight of a man who had never been denied anything he truly wanted. He nodded at the driver. The car slowed. It stopped on the shoulder of the Brooklyn Bridge, the East River churning black and silver below us, the Manhattan skyline glittering like a knife against the velvet sky. I opened the door. The cold air hit my face, carrying the smell of brine and exhaust and the distant promise of rain. I stepped out. My heels on the asphalt made a sound like gunshots. "Claire," my father said. He had rolled down his window. His face was pale in the sodium light. "Don't be dramatic. Get back in the car." I looked at him, at the man who had taught me to ride a bike, who had read me The Little Prince in the original French, who had held my hand at my mother's funeral and promised me that he would always, always keep me safe. I looked at him, and I saw the architecture of his love for what it was: not a shelter, but a fortress; not a garden, but a prison with very good lighting. "You came?" I said. My voice carried over the sound of the river, over the hum of the traffic passing behind me. "You kept your promise. You came in 15 minutes. "Of course I did," he said. And there it was, the faintest crack in his armor, the smallest admission that this meant something, that the code between us had been real, once. "But you didn't come for me," I said. "You came for the brand. You came for the stock price. You came because a public scandal involving your daughter would have hurt the Hale Media quarterly earnings more than a slap hurt my face." His jaw tightened. "That is not fair." "Fair?" I laughed. The sound was ugly, broken, nothing like the laugh Gavin had fallen in love with. "When has fair ever mattered in this family?" I reached into my clutch. I took out my phone. I opened the thread with my father, the one with 3 years of silence punctuated by birthdays and holidays, the thread where I had sent the words that had summoned him tonight. I typed 4 new words. I showed him the screen. "I am letting go." Then I deleted the thread. I deleted the contact. I turned off the phone and I dropped it into the river. It made a small splash, barely audible over the wind. It was gone. Claire, my father said. His voice had changed. There was something in it now, something raw and frightened that I had never heard before. Claire, please, you don't understand what you're doing. You have nowhere to go. You have no one. I looked at the city, at the lights in the windows of the buildings where people were living lives I had once thought were beneath me, lives of paychecks and arguments and love that didn't require contracts. I thought of the women's shelter where I had worked before Gavin had convinced me to quit, to focus on our marriage, to be present for his career. I thought of the director there, a woman named Rosa who had seen through my lies about why I was leaving, who had pressed her card into my hand on my last day and said, "The door is always open, Claire, even when you think you've burned it down." I had burned so many doors, and I had told myself it was for love. "You're wrong," I said to my father. I didn't shout. I didn't need to. The wind carried my words to him just fine. I have myself, and for the first time in 34 years, that is enough. I turned. I began to walk. The bridge stretched before me, a ribbon of light and shadow leading toward Brooklyn, toward a borough where nobody knew my name, where nobody cared about my father's empire or my husband's ambition, or the price of silence in a city that ate its young. "Claire!" My father's voice cracking at the edges. "Claire, if you walk away, I can't protect you." I didn't stop. I walked faster, my heels clicking a rhythm that matched my heartbeat. I reached into my hair and pulled out the diamond pins that had been my mother's, that had been Vivian's gift, that had been the weight of generations pressing down on my skull. I dropped them on the asphalt one by one, small stars falling to earth. Behind me, I heard the car door open, heard my father's footsteps, heard Marcus say softly, "Mr. Hale, let her go." I didn't look back. I couldn't. If I looked back, I might see my father's face crumbling, might see the man behind the empire, the father who had truly loved me in the only way he knew how, and if I saw that, I might not have the strength to keep walking. So I walked. The cold wind bit through my silk dress, raising gooseflesh on my arms, but I didn't shiver. I felt awake. I felt alive in a way that no amount of luxury had ever made me feel. Every step was a small revolution. Every breath was a declaration of independence. The bridge ended. I descended into Brooklyn Heights, into streets lined with brownstones and trees that whispered in the autumn wind. I had no phone, no wallet, no plan. I was 34 years old, wearing a $10,000 dress, with a bruise blooming on my cheek like a dark flower, and I had never been more terrified, or more free. I walked until my feet blistered inside my heels, until the city began to soften at the edges, until the sky turned from black to the bruised purple of pre-dawn. I walked past closed bodegas and sleeping dogs and early morning runners who looked at me with curiosity, but not recognition. I walked until I found myself in front of a building I knew, a nondescript brick structure with a blue door and a small sign that read, "Hope House Women's Shelter." The lights were on inside. Someone was always awake here. I climbed the steps. I rang the bell. I waited. The door opened. Rosa stood there, 62, wearing a cardigan that had seen better decades, her reading glasses pushed up into her gray hair. She looked at me, at my dress, at my face, at my bare feet, because I had abandoned my shoes 3 blocks back when the blisters had begun to bleed. "Claire," she said, not surprised, just sad, and something else, something that looked like welcome. "I burned the bridge," I said. My voice was hoarse from the cold, from the walking, from the years of silence. "I burned all of them. I don't have anywhere else to go." Rosa stepped aside. She opened the door wider. "Then you'd better come in," she said. "It's cold out there." I crossed the threshold. The heat of the shelter enveloped me, carrying the smells of coffee and laundry detergent and the particular, complicated humanity of a place where broken things came to heal. I heard children sleeping in the rooms above, the soft murmur of a television in the common area, the rhythmic breathing of women who had escaped their own prisons and were learning, slowly, to breathe again. Rosa handed me a blanket. It was scratchy, acrylic, the color of a sunset that had given up. I wrapped it around my shoulders. I sat on a folding chair in the entryway, and I finally let myself cry. Not the elegant tears of a woman at a party, not the controlled weeping of a daughter at a funeral. This was something else. This was the sound of a dam breaking, of 34 years of pressure finally finding release. I cried for my mother, who had never learned to walk away. I cried for the girl I had been at 6, at 12, at 20, who had believed that love meant obedience and that protection meant ownership. I cried for Gavin, who had been kind once, who had lost himself in the same machinery that had consumed my father, who had struck me not because he was evil, but because he had been taught that power was the only language that mattered. And I cried for my father, who had come when I called, who had kept his promise in the only way he knew how, who had offered me a gilded cage and could not understand why I preferred the uncertainty of the open sky. When I finished, the sun was rising. Light came through the dirty windows of the shelter in long golden shafts that illuminated dust motes dancing like tiny galaxies. Rosa sat beside me, saying nothing, handing me tissues when I needed them, her presence a quiet anchor in the storm. "What now?" I asked her. My voice was wrecked, but it was mine. Rosa smiled. It was a small smile, tired but real. "Now," she said, "you sleep. Then you eat. Then you decide what you want to build. Not what your father built. Not what your husband wanted. What you want, Claire. And you build it one brick at a time." I looked at my hands. At the hands that had held champagne flutes and signed checks and typed desperate messages into phones. They were empty now. They were free. "I don't know how," I whispered. "Yes, you do," Rosa said. "You just walked away from an empire. You already know how to build a revolution. You just have to learn how to build a life." She led me to a small room on the second floor, a room with a narrow bed and a window that looked out at the street, at the city waking up, at the ordinary miracles of people going to work and walking dogs and living lives unburdened by dynasties. I lay down on the bed. The mattress was thin, the pillow was flat, and I had never been more comfortable in my life. Before I slept, I thought of the river, of the phone sinking into the dark water, carrying with it the last thread that bound me to the man who had raised me and the man who had broken me. I thought of the diamond pins on the bridge, small treasures abandoned in the pursuit of something greater. And I thought of my mother, not the woman in the photographs, perfect and poised, but the woman I had glimpsed sometimes in the late afternoons, sitting by the window of her bedroom, staring out at the garden with an expression of such profound longing that I had been frightened to ask what she was seeing. I understood now. She had been seeing this, the possibility of a life outside the frame, the dream of a door that opened not to another room in the same house, but to the world itself. I slept. I dreamed of bridges, of walking across them, of the wind and the dark water below and the stars above, and the knowledge that on the other side, someone was waiting. Not a savior, not a father or a husband or a keeper. Just me, waiting for myself, strong enough finally to open the door. When I woke, it was afternoon. The light in the room had shifted, become warmer, more forgiving. There was a knock at the door, soft and tentative. I sat up, my cheek throbbing, my feet aching, my heart beating with a steady, unfamiliar rhythm. "Come in," I said. The door opened. It was a young woman, maybe 19, with dark circles under her eyes and a baby on her hip. She looked at me with the wary curiosity of someone who had learned that strangers usually brought pain. "Rosa said to tell you," the girl said, her voice barely above a whisper, "that there's someone downstairs. A lawyer. She says she's from you." Not from them. I understood. Not from my father. Not from Gavin. From me. The me I was becoming. I stood. I walked to the window. Down on the street, a woman in a charcoal suit stood beside a yellow taxi, looking up at the building with an expression of professional patience. I didn't recognize her, but I recognized the look in her eyes, even from 4 stories up. It was the look of someone who had chosen a side, the right side. I turned back to the girl with the baby. "Tell her I'll be down in 10 minutes, I said. The girl nodded. She didn't leave immediately. She lingered in the doorway, studying me with an intensity that made me want to look away, but I didn't. "You look like her," the girl said finally. "Like who?" "Like the woman on the news. The one they said got hit at the party. But they said she went home with her rich dad." She tilted her head. "You don't look like you went home with anyone." I smiled. It hurt my face, but I did it anyway. "I didn't," I said. "I came home to myself." The girl smiled back, a small, hesitant thing, but real. Then she left, her footsteps fading down the hall. I stood at the window for a long moment, watching the city breathe, watching the lawyer wait, watching my life begin again in the space between one heartbeat and the next. I thought of my father, in his office on the 47th floor, surrounded by screens and yes men and the machinery of a narrative he controlled but could never fully escape. I thought of Gavin, signing contracts in a conference room somewhere, trading his violence for a promotion, never understanding that he had sold the only thing he couldn't buy back. And I thought of the bridge, of the walk, of the cold and the dark and the terrifying, liberating knowledge that I was alone. Not abandoned. Just finally, irrevocably, free. I went downstairs. The lawyer stood as I entered the lobby, her hand extended. "Ms. Hale," she said, "my name is Sarah Chen. I'm a family law attorney. I specialize in high-conflict dissolution cases, and I work exclusively for clients who are leaving systems of power, not entering them." I took her hand. It was warm and firm and human. "It's Ashford," I said. "Just Claire Ashford." Sarah nodded. "Then let's get to work, Claire Ashford. You have a lot of bridges to build, and I'm here to make sure no one burns them." I looked around the lobby of the shelter, at the women sitting on the couches, at the children playing with blocks, at the walls that were thin and the floors that were worn, and the light that came through the windows with an honesty that no amount of money could manufacture. I thought of my father's empire, of his towers of glass and steel, of his newsrooms and his algorithms and his carefully managed silences, and I chose this. The thin walls, the worn floors, the truth. "Yes," I said. "Let's build." We stepped out into the afternoon. The sun was bright, almost too bright, and the city was loud and chaotic and alive. I walked beside Sarah Chen toward the courthouse, toward the paperwork, toward the long, difficult work of dismantling a marriage and a name and a life that had never truly been mine. But as we walked, I felt something shift in the air. A cool breeze off the river, carrying the smell of autumn and change and the distant, persistent promise of winter. I lifted my face to it. I closed my eyes. I breathed. And for the first time in 34 years, I knew exactly who I was. Not a daughter, not a wife, not a secret or a scandal or a commodity to be managed. Just Claire, walking forward, one step at a time, into the light, into the wind, into the beautiful, terrifying, magnificent uncertainty of a life that belonged, finally and only, to me. The bridge was burned, the cage was open, and I was flying.